Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a Triad production. I'm your host, Dr. Graham Taylor. My guest today is Dr. Keith Campbell. Keith is a professor of psychology at the University of Georgia, is the author of more than 200 scientific papers and several books, including The Narcissism Epidemic, Living in the Age of Entitlement, and The New Science of Narcissism. His work on narcissism has appeared across print media, and he has made numerous media appearances, from The Today Show to The Joe Rogan Experience. He also wrote the popular TED Ed lesson on narcissism. He holds a BA from the University of California at Berkeley, an MA from San Diego State University, and a PhD from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We're excited to have Keith with us today to discuss narcissism and exploring the rise of entitlement in modern society. Keith, it's so nice to have you with us. Welcome today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Graham. Appreciate it.
Nice to have you here. You know, this is a great topic, and I think it's, to be honest with you, a timely topic. And this word narcissism gets thrown around quite a bit, playfully, and sometimes in a way that kind of raises concerns, and we need to understand some things. But as we start out, give us kind of some misconceptions, common misconceptions about narcissism, as well as maybe kind of anchoring us today in this whole concept and the definition of what narcissism really is.
Yeah. So narcissism, it became a very popular term in the last 5-10 years, especially when discussing your ex-boyfriend or, your favorite politician on the other side. And often it's used appropriately, but most of the time people are saying narcissism, meaning somebody who's kind of arrogant and a jerk, and it's not very specific beyond that. Unfortunately, narcissism it's a technical term. It's a psychological term and has a couple different meanings that I'm going to go through because it's a little complicated.
Yeah.
The first thing when we're talking about narcissism is we're talking about like a personality trait. But what I mean by a trait, it's a sort of a characteristic or typical way of responding across time and situation. It's just sort of the way you are. Some people are more narcissistic and some are less narcissistic, but we're all somewhere in there. It's a trait. And the trait of narcissism itself has two different manifestations. What most of us are thinking about when we think about narcissism is what we might call grandiose narcissism. And this is this form of narcissism that has confidence, self-esteem, energy, self-promotion, extroversion, but also a sense of entitlement, a sense of self-importance, a sense of specialness. Sort of, I'm special, I'm important, but I'm also energetic and confident. And these are, you end up voting for people like this because you
Yes,
like
we
them when
do.
you first meet them and you end up dating them and things. And then there's another phase to this narcissism, which we don't see as much in the normal world, but if you're in the clinical world, you see a little more, which is this more vulnerable side of narcissism. This is a more defensive, lower self-esteem face of narcissism. And it's essentially somebody who thinks they're important and special and better than the other people, but also feels that they're not really confident dealing with people, that people are maybe slighting them or not paying sufficient attention to them. So it's a much more defensive.
Mhm.
And when you meet people who are more vulnerable, you might think, this person's a little depressed, but they won't seem narcissistic to you right away. So that's the trait of narcissism. But what makes it confusing is there is a clinical disorder or psychiatric disorder called narcissistic personality disorder, which is an extreme form of narcissism, which is, both grandiose, but maybe a little vulnerability, but it's extreme and inflexible, and it leads to what they call clinically significant impairment, which means a psychiatrist or other mental health professional says, Keith, your narcissism is interfering with your life and impairing you in your relationships, your ability to make decisions at work, your ability to regulate your emotions, or your ability to sort of think. So it has to be extreme to be narcissistic personality disorder. And that's pretty rare, 1-2% of the population at any time. So to answer your question, when we say
Yeah.
narcissism, Most of us are talking about a personality
Yeah.
trait that's sort of high or low. Sometimes we're misinterpreting that to be a clinical disorder, which would be
Yes.
really extreme. And sometimes we're thinking about this more defensive, vulnerable condition, especially if we're in the more clinical literature. It's similar to somebody saying, I've got a friend who's depressed. Well, do you mean they're sort of sad? Or do you mean that they're clinically depressed and they should be hospitalized because they have a risk for suicide?
Right.
And we use the word depressed for both those things. The same with narcissism.
Yeah. It kind of crosses a line. You know,
Hmm.
I think one of the common misconceptions is that narcissists, whether it's kind of a trait that's not clinical yet, and even those that become they cross that line and becomes
Yeah.
clinically significant, that they're doing it intentionally, or narcissism is something that someone chooses to be.
Yes. Life doesn't seem to work like that necessarily. Most of our personalities we're kind of wired the way we're wired. If you look at let's say the behavioral genetics, the transmission of personality in families, put it that way. How does personality transfer through families? What you see is about 40%, let's say, is genetic. We're just kind of
Mhm,
wired to be a certain way.
mhm.
And then maybe 20% of that, these numbers fluctuate a little bit, but about maybe 10-20% is parenting. And the rest is just random culture. It's who we ended up hanging out with in high school, who we were,
Right.
buddies with, what we were exposed to in media. And so the way we end up with our narcissism or any other trait is going to be partly wiring, partly how we're raised. By the time we're 25 or, in our 20s and 30s, we get some choice over this. We can start to say, I don't like who I am. I want to be a different person. So there is a little bit of ability to change, but we don't select into our personalities. We more select out of them. We
That's
go,
right.
here's who I am. Yeah, this
That's a
isn't
good
working
point.
great. I want to
Yeah.
I want to be a little better or worse.
Right.
And what you see with people who are narcissistic is that sometimes they see problems with the narcissism. So it's not that they say, hey, this is the best. Sometimes they say, it kind of hurts my relationships a little bit.
This is kind of a funny question, but is narcissism in any way adaptive to the person that's a narcissist or has the traits? What's
Oh,
the adaptive component to it?
absolutely. Yeah. I really think of narcissism as a trade off. It has some benefits and has some costs.
Mhm.
Here's where narcissism benefits you. It benefits you when you meet people for the first time because you have social confidence. It benefits public performance. So doing this kind of thing, podcasting, if you're too arrogant, it's hard actually. But if I were on stage, being narcissistic really helps being on stage. It helps
Mhm.
you rise as a leader. It
Yes.
helps you get dates,
Yeah.
you know? So it has lots of benefits, but they're often in the short term.
Yeah.
Where the costs of narcissism come are in the formation and development of long-term relationships. So you're narcissistic, it might be great to start a relationship, but you're going to make a terrible husband.
Yeah.
Or it might be great for becoming a politician, but you're going to be a bit corrupt and easily manipulated. Or it's great for becoming a leader, but you're going to be a little bit risk-taking and self-centered in your leadership.
Mhm.
So it has short-term benefits to the narcissist, and the costs are usually in the longer term. And unfortunately, the people who suffer from narcissism are often the people in the narcissist's life: a spouse, a child, a
Yeah.
coworker, an employee. You know, it's a bit like addiction. You can be addicted to a drug and you go, hey, it's working great for me, but it's not working so great for my family. And narcissism can have some of that as well.
What is the narcissist feeling on the inside?
That's it's an interesting question, and it depends on the form of narcissism a little bit. What it looks like, and I'm going to say the data are just emerging here because this is getting these kind of data are hard. You've got to record people over time and get really high density measurements. What it looks like to me, though, is grandiose narcissism feels more about seeking rewards or opportunities to get esteem or status. So your day is thinking about yourself and then, hey, here's an opportunity for me to be a winner. I look at me, I look good. I look good in the mirror walking by that person. I look good at dinner. I got a good looking partner with me. I feel good in my car because it's an awesome car. So it's more about this positive emotion associated with status and esteem. That's or, I'm fighting somebody because they said my car wasn't good enough, or I feel a little bad because I've got my new cyber truck and a guy's got a Rivian and that's more expensive. And I feel a little bad, but mostly grandiose narcissism is positive affect or positive mood. And with vulnerability, it's a different story. It's much more about being defensive. And what that means is you're being vigilant for people that are threatening your ego. So you kind of wake up, you go, yeah, I'm an awesome person, but people are going to try to put me down today. So when I'm looking at my world, I'm going to say, oh, that person's criticizing me and that kind of hurts. And then maybe what I'll do because I feel bad is I'll fantasize about revenge. Oh, that person criticized my car. I'm going to get them one day. Oh, just you wait till I'm powerful and then I'm going to crush my enemies. So there's much more of the grandiose self-talk with vulnerability. Does that make sense in a weird way? Imagine you feel bad, you want to feel better, you want to regulate your self-esteem. You're not socially confident like somebody grandiose. So what you do is you tell yourself stories. I'm going to get those people. People are going to see what an alpha male I am one day. People are going to respect me. So it's a much more defensive, vulnerable way of dealing with life. It's not a real fun way to live.
Well, I was going to say on the outside, everybody thinks that the narcissist is kind of, that guy or sometimes that gal.
Yeah.
And man, they appear confident. On the inside, a lot of times they are the most fragile, kind of clay-feeted,
Yeah.
folks. And a lot of, one of the things that I oftentimes imagine is they're a bucket with a hole in it. And they're going around trying to get their source all the time because they can't hold a consistent, constant sense of themselves. And they're looking for source all the time. And it can become just, somewhat playful and fun to the extreme where they're really requiring other people and using other people in very manipulative. Now we're going down the more psychopathic,
Yes.
sociopathic, realms. But nonetheless, it's about trying to get their source to fill
Yes.
themselves up because they cannot hold that sense of esteem or, like you said, that status on
Yeah.
their own.
Yes. I like that, the bucket with the hole. I sometimes use the metaphor of sharks. Like you just can't stop swimming. You've just got to keep going because with narcissism, because it's about being better than other people with grandiosity, you've always got every day you have a chance to lose. So every day you've got to go out there and prove yourself to feel that status, to fill up that,
Yeah,
that esteem, that sense of status, that sense of worth. If you stop doing it, you just start to sink. You're just not relevant anymore.
right.
It's like being famous, it's like, what have you done for me lately? And if you haven't done anything, but with vulnerable narcissism, it's more like I've got a little tiny bit in the bucket and I'm going to protect the heck out of it.
That's right.
I'm not letting anyone get my water out of my bucket. So it's a little
Yeah.
different. That said, when you look at people who are more grandiose narcissists, it's not typically that deep down they feel they're losers or empty or worthless.
No.
It's more that they need that fix. And if they don't have it, they're like, yeah, I'm a 10, but really, if I don't have my fix, I feel like I'm a 7.
Well, you used that reference earlier of needing a mirror.
Yeah.
And growing up, they oftentimes don't in their parental caregiving relationships. They don't have a healthy mirror. And so they're going around in life not looking just to get their buckets filled up, but they're also looking for mirrored opportunities from other people by the way they present so they can continue to hold a sense and a vision and an image of themselves.
So that is one model of narcissistic development is about appropriate mirroring, exactly like you say. And I'm spacing if this is Kernberg or Kohut, and I think I would put this as Kohut, but I mixed those two up, and I apologize to the psychoanalysts listening. But it's the idea that when you grow up, you want to, let's say, a mother who reflects back to your kid, you think you're special, and you want a parent who thinks you're special too,
Right.
but not perfect because over time you realize I'm not totally special. So it's this being a good parent and a good mirror, but not an over the top mirror.
Yeah.
And so conceptually, what happens is if you have that good mirroring, you develop a sense of healthy self esteem that's like a well or a reservoir that you can carry with you in life. And you don't need to go out there and get it from people because you
That's
wake
right.
up, you're like, I feel good. I don't need to go prove myself to
That's
people.
right.
With narcissism, with the more grandiosity, you're out there trying to get that status and esteem all the time.
Yeah.
And if you're good looking and you're wealthy, you can pull it off pretty well. If you're famous, you can do it. If you're less attractive, if you grow old, which many of us do, and you're not as popular or not as attractive, it gets harder to be narcissistic. Yeah.
Yeah. You're talking about the role of parenting, and there's some biological nature nurture, pieces to this, and the role of a caregiver. And if this child is being idolized and cared for and told these things that they're just special and really good, it's not a bad thing to mirror the worth of your child to them, but there's a line, and there's also a necessity where you have to say, "Hey, you're good at this," or "I notice you've got some skills or abilities in this area," but to supplement it with some content where you can really anchor it in. I'm Scottish, and there's a really fun term called fur coat and nay drawers, where you got this beautiful fur coat, but you open up the fur coat and you're just you're kind of buck naked here in your shorts, and there's nothing there. And you always feel insecure because on the inside at some level there's nothing there really to
Yeah.
show for what's on the outside. Or I looked out on your website, there was something about you get a trophy just because you showed up, and
Yeah.
you think you're great, or the participation.
Yeah.
And that actually does people a disservice because it's not anchored in anything other than just words. And so they're always searching for and looking for that mirror you're talking about, and that source to fill up their bucket, because they haven't got it built in a way they can wake up and say, "Hey, I'm okay. What do I get to do today?" Rather than, "What do I need to do today?" Unconsciously, "What do I need to do today to fill up my bucket?"
So when you look at the parenting literature, the data on parenting with narcissism, what you see with the more grandiose narcissists, this is not everybody, but this is the
Yeah.
pattern you see, is parents put you on a pedestal, meaning the parents are treating you like a special child, like a trophy
Right.
child, putting you on a pedestal. But what your parents are often doing is they're using you as a prop to get their own self-esteem.
Yeah.
So you grow up with a parent who's saying, "You're great. Look at Keith. You're so smart. You're special. You're going to win this award." And I'm thinking I'm getting this award. My parents love me, but really my parents don't love me. They're using me to get self-esteem too, because
It's
they're
filling
calling
their
up,
bucket.
it's filling their
It's a
bucket.
it's a it it's a vicarious measure or a vicarious
Yeah.
mirror, and it's a narcissistic extension, isn't it, of themselves?
Exactly. So you as a child become a narcissistic extension of your parents.
Mhm.
The story you tell yourself is I had a really good childhood and my parents thought I was great, but something doesn't feel right. You get older, you get some insight and you go, "Oh my goodness, this
Right.
my childhood was fake. Yeah, I was a movie set. It wasn't good in it." And
Yes.
then you get some real pain that comes with that, but with
Yeah.
that pain comes the chance to grow and become your own person.
We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Continuing education is both a requirement and a learning opportunity, but finding the right CE provider can be challenging. AATBS, a triad company, offers continuing education for psychologists, social workers, marriage and family therapists, counselors, and behavior analysts. CE courses are available both individually and as part of our new All Access Pass. All Access Pass provides a library of over 250 unique courses. That's more than 800 hours of CEs, with new courses being added every month. As a special offer, Behavioral Health Today listeners can save 15% on CE purchases. Visit us at aatbs.com/BHT and enter promo code BHT15 during checkout. That's aatbs.com/BHT. Check out our library and check off your CE requirements today.
Yeah. That's so good. We're talking about the parental piece of this, and I'm going to get into a couple of the pieces here, and including your book in just a moment. But let's talk about our society right now. We're on our screens anywhere from 4 to 10 or 12 hours a day, if not more. The things that are being presented to us, the need for being liked in the social media. Talk about the role of social media, if you would, around
It
narcissism in our society.
It's it's so complicated, and I've honestly been looking at social media and narcissism for like 15 years. I mean, it's
Okay.
almost since it started. It's crazy. When we first started looking at social media and narcissism, what we noticed and what you see is that people who are narcissistic, especially more grandiose, they like social media because it's an opportunity to self promote and connect with people.
Yeah.
So, whenever, if you look on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or any of those sites, the people who are more narcissistic will have more friends, followers, or connections because partly that's extroversion, it's attention seeking, it's hey, this here's a chance for me to be a little bit of a celebrity. I'm
Right.
going to do it, right?
Right.
So, social media has a high proportion of narcissism networked in there. That means when you go onto social media, what you see is a world that's more narcissistic than the actual world because the people putting out most of the stuff are a little more narcissistic. Doesn't mean everybody on social media is narcissistic, but that's where you get that pressure.
Yeah.
So, my original thought was that, well, what we're going to see is this big increase in grandiose narcissism, and people start migrating more and more online, and they're going to have more and more opportunities to self promote. That didn't seem to happen after a point. It looks like, and I'm 2012, 2013, somewhere around there, we started seeing some more negative consequences of social media, especially for young girls,
Hmm.
because what was going on where there was a lot of social pressure and social comparison. So
Yes.
I get on social media and I've got my friends, saying, hey, check me out at the party in Dubai. How's your weekend going? And you go, oh my God, I'm home alone babysitting
I
again.
suck.
I suck.
Right.
Right. And then you add filters and things. And so I think, unfortunately, social media could have been a way for us to become all more grandiose. I think what's happened is we're seeing a lot more vulnerability now,
Isn't
a
that
lot,
interesting?
a lot more negativity,
Yeah.
especially again with young women, but we're seeing it with guys as well. And the narcissism epidemic, which we really saw this big increase in narcissism, seems like it's coming back down.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just because the social comparison, and when you get on social media, it's very hard to win. You can't be the best looking, you can't be the most successful. So
Right.
it's very hard to get real positive messages of connection.
Yeah. You can only have the nicest and shiniest fur coat for only so long. And once it's there
Right.
and everybody else seems to have a better, bigger, whatever else it's going to be, it's really a great point you're making. Narcissism to a point is in the service of something very important. It's in the service of keeping their esteem, their status, their sense of themselves, and it's all unconscious.
Yeah.
They're not waking up in the morning saying, "You know what, today I got to get my bucket filled by doing this, and I'm going to meet this person to have a good mirroring experience because my own self-esteem and status is lacking." There's no awareness around this until maybe, like you said, maybe in the later teens or in the later 20s rather, or in that area, or they come into therapy and they say, "Hey,
Yeah.
something's not working in my life."
Yeah.
Then they, begin to kind of look at, well, what am I bringing to it? That might because people don't seem to be showing up. But what they're missing is what you mentioned earlier. At some point, what serves you maybe to be, outgoing and we usually like these people. We want to date these
Yeah.
people. We want to be around them because there's
Yeah.
something good and they're charismatic. But there's a point where that gets crossed that's when the substance isn't there. And that's when some things get a little bit darker at times, a little bit more challenging. And isn't it interesting that what can start out like on social media with something that's maybe narcissistic comparison, all those things, actually turns dark at some point. It becomes with social media, like you said, we see the rise of depression, suicide, and anxiety
Yeah.
skyrocketing because of that. And there's a clear link to the social media piece of it.
So the thing with narcissism is you wake up, this is what you're going to do.
Yeah.
You hook into people with with relationships because you're charismatic, because you're likable. But the natural course of relationships is to go from something sort of shallow and fun to
Yeah.
something more deep and emotionally intimate and
Yes.
involving trust and mutual care.
Yes.
And what happens with narcissism is you get the narcissist gets the relationship, and instead of going, hey, this is a chance for me to have some mutual care and trust and support, they go, man, here's a chance for me to hook somebody in and exploit the hell out of them to boost my self-esteem.
That's right.
So I'm going to start. This is where the dark stuff comes in. This is where I
Yes.
start maybe manipulating somebody.
Yeah.
And then the person says, I'm being manipulated. You go, no, you're not. Are you crazy? I'm
Yeah.
totally normal. And this is what we call gaslighting these days, from
Yes.
the old movie or the play about changing the gaslights to make your wife crazy.
Yeah.
So you start becoming more manipulative in relationships. It's very easy to start a relationship with somebody narcissistic because of the charisma.
Yeah.
But once you're hooked into it, it can get hard to get out.
What's really hard about that too is that, like you said, as you were beginning today, you know, these are good people, the ones that are kind of on the healthy side of narcissism, if you will, before it gets malignant and everything
Yeah.
else. And they're fun, they're engaging. You get kind of caught up in them. And if you're going to be dating someone like this, the hard part is the narcissist holds a promise almost like, wow, look at what I get to be in relationship with. And you go along further and further. None of these things seem to kind of fully manifest because inside there's just, there's an drawers. And there's nothing substantive there. And they're always looking for something. And every time you ask for your own need, well, then you're selfish. Or you get gaslit or the
Yeah.
goalpost move. Or they create, all the things that highly manipulative people do to keep others at bay so they can get their needs met and they don't get called out. And there's also that narcissistic rage. If you call somebody out and say, hey, this is who you are, they, in order to protect, will get rageful, will get angry, and will attack with the gaslighting and other things you're mentioning. But for those getting into a relationship with them, it can be disappointing, can it?
Oh, absolutely. Because I mean, I used to call this I still do call it the chocolate cake model. It's essentially, you give people a choice of food. You say you want chocolate cake or you want this healthy salad. And every time they pick the chocolate cake and
Right.
you eat chocolate cake and you feel fabulous for 20 minutes and it's great. And then you
That's
feel
right.
sick and you hate yourself.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with narcissism. You get that, you start that relationship, you get that rush. This person's confident, they're
Yeah.
charming, they're charismatic. It's going to be awesome when we're deeply in love and get to meet each other's parents. That never happens because that's not what the narcissist wants. They're not
Yes.
in the relationship to get to know you as a person. They're in the relationship because they just need their ego needs met.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you almost always end up disappointed. If you're a narcissist, if there's a problem in your life, your natural inclination is to blame everybody else. If you're not, if you're in a relationship with a narcissist and you're not yourself and your relationship starts to fail, your natural inclination is to blame yourself. What am I doing wrong that my narcissistic relationship isn't working? So these relationships often will start very positive, but then they become very troubled, and the person dating the narcissist will often think that he or she is at fault for the
Yes.
relationship. Like,
Yes.
and then they do more and more. And then it gets even worse because then after the relationship, explodes because the person's being unfaithful or lying or dishonest, you still blame yourself for another year for being so dumb that you dated the narcissist in the first
That's right.
place.
I
So you
got
got a whole
tricked.
nother 6 months of self-loathing after. And I'm like, and if I can say anything to anybody listening, if you ended up in a relationship with a narcissist, it's not your fault. You
No.
probably found somebody charming who seemed likable and you followed the normal rules and you found yourself in a bad position. So please don't beat yourself up.
Yeah, that's a very gracious and very accurate word and
Yeah,
encouragement. You don't know. They don't have narcissism on their T-shirt when you first meet them, and on the
exactly.
back, you'll be disappointed at some point. It's
Yeah.
not there, and you don't know.
No.
That's a very healthy word. Hey, you wrote a book called The New Science of Narcissism. Give us kind of a pithy understanding of that book, would you?
Sure. I'm an academic. I'm not a
Yeah.
clinical psychologist. I do research and I've been doing it 25 years, maybe 30. It's been a long time on narcissism. I think it's been 30. And I literally got to the point where you go, I better write this all down because I'm going to retire and everyone's going to forget and they're going to have to reinvent the wheel. So I wrote a book called The New Science of Narcissism, which the idea is that anybody who's interested in narcissism can read that. And if
Okay.
they read the book, then they can go straight to the academic or the scientific literature themselves and be able to understand it and know what's going on.
Really good.
I'm
Really
a
good.
big believer in people like doing their own research. I know a lot of scientists are like, "Oh, people are too stupid to do their own research." I think scientists are often very stupid, and I think people can do their own research if we help them, give some background. So that was the idea behind it, is kind of go through narcissism in a real
Yeah.
complete way for people.
I really like that. For the person that has the narcissistic traits and some tendencies, a lot of times when it's clinical narcissism, they don't stay in treatment for very long. Treatment can, the best treatment requires us to take a look at ourselves. And for those that are clinically diagnosed DSM-5 with narcissism, they don't oftentimes stay very long, or if they do, some of the gains are just minimal. But for those that have some narcissistic traits where, and characteristic traits where it's been in the service of something very important, but there's a malleability in there
Yeah.
where they're saying something not like you said at the beginning. I love what you said. My life is not working in the way that I want. I don't get to have any depth. I said that people having depth.
Yeah.
I want that. I have some insecurities that kicked up at times. When someone gives me feedback, I get kind of defensive and I don't want to be that way. So it's ego dystonic to some degree. And they want to shift. So they want to connect, let's say cultivate or kind of curate a healthier self-esteem and maybe a self-confidence that's really substantive. So when they open it for a coat,
Yeah.
there's some good stuff there. What would you say to those folks that are interested in kind of growing that aspect of themselves?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to do is, if you're sitting there going, "Yeah, my narcissism's an issue," it's hard to say, "I'm gonna change my narcissism."
Right.
It's much easier to say,
Yeah.
"My issue is, I have a sense of entitlement. I think things should go my way all the time, and that's caused me to be frustrated too much."
Really
Or,
good.
when I talk to people, I talk about myself a lot and I can't really form communication. Or whenever I do stuff, I feel like I need attention. I'm attention seeking. So there's something going on that find out what you're doing. And what you're doing is probably a way of regulating yourself, which is a mouthful of words. You're doing something to feel a certain way.
That's right.
So, maybe you're entitled. So you're always yelling at people when you drive, like I do. And it makes you feel better in the short term. But over time, you're like, why am I angry all the time? I don't want to be
Yes.
this guy. So I would suggest identifying what is going on and then really focus on that in a very direct behavioral way. If you've got a sense of entitlement, practice gratitude every
Yeah.
day. Just every day, just, why look at the sunset, go, I can't believe I live here. I'm grateful to God. I'm grateful to my family, whoever,
Yeah.
whatever in the universe put me here. Thank you. If you're attention seeking, you always do things for attention. Go do stuff by yourself. Do things because you have joy. Do things because they give you intrinsic motivation or flow experiences. Go surfing in the morning with no one out and just see if you enjoy it, and just learn to build joy in your own life just by doing things you think are cool. And
Yeah.
then you don't need to find it from somebody because you'll learn to build it. If it's a relational issue, focus on compassion. Just
Mm.
focus on practicing listening to people. Do a compassion meditation. Practice helping somebody every day. Practice being kind for no reason. Like, I'm talking very basic behavioral practices that you intentionally do for a significant period of time.
Boy, those are fantastic, Keith. I love those. Practicing gratitude and joy and compassion. Those are all, I always like that idea. Identify the things you can control and then control the controllables. I
Yes.
love that. And these are all things that actually are changing that allow us to go deeper within and allow us to maybe kind of cultivate or discover other aspects of ourselves that maybe to date we've been a little afraid of or we didn't know that we haven't cultivated yet. Or maybe they weren't cultivated for us and our caregivers, and maybe they did the best they could with what they had, but maybe we get to
Oh,
be responsible now for these things. And those are wonderful ways to tangibly do something towards filling in ourselves.
oh, yeah. When you're young, you can make your life about a performance. You're 20 years old and it's all about, status and success or whatever. You get older, that's just not going to cut it. Nobody
That's right.
cares. You're irrelevant. You gotta find something inward. And I think practicing these things is a better way to do it than going, I don't like who I am. I
Yeah.
have to change. I'm like, just do a positive practice over time. And the thing is, in the world, if you start putting out positive stuff, it starts to feed back and build on itself. you're out there trying to be compassionate every day, and somebody's going to notice, like, yeah, Keith's trying to be a nice guy, and they might be nice to you or give you some positive feedback. Hey, you were real nice. I appreciated that. So it becomes self-reinforcing. You do your work for joy, and people want to be around you. People want to be around people who are excited about what they do. So you're
Yeah.
going to get your narcissistic needs met anyway. It's just indirectly, instead of, going out there and pouncing on people and sucking the ego out of them, people
Yeah.
will just kind of bring it to you.
That's
Yeah.
it. That's such a great reframe around this. You're still going to get it, but if you can just kind of slow it down a little bit through joy, gratitude, compassion, or just
Yeah.
coming into a relationship with other people with another person's focus, which is almost paradoxical. You mean I've got to stop going after my need because my bucket is empty. I don't have a sense of myself right now, and you're telling me instead maybe to practice some things where I'm serving others first, that I can
Yes.
actually get my bucket filled in a lasting way and have a healthy mirroring relationship.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's so good, man.
You're gonna feel good about yourself, but you're gonna have to give up the illusion that you're, somehow unique or special or better
Right.
than anybody. But unfortunately, we all have to give up that illusion at some point,
And then maybe what you get filled is maybe, you're special in some ways that maybe I'm not. Maybe you got some unique things that I haven't got, and I get to hold those up. It doesn't mean that you're, some going to be some idealized guy, but you're going to be a kind of a cool guy with these cool traits that I just love hanging out with, and we get to kind
Yeah.
of ping off of each other in life.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. Well, it's been a gret time being with you on the show here today, and I would love our listeners to be able to follow up with you afterwards. Give us some links where they can find out more about you, about your book, The Narcissism Epidemic, The New Science of Narcissism, and just the work you're doing, Keith.
Yeah. My website, wkeithcampbell.com. I think I've updated that and has most of my books on there, or Amazon. Podcasts, you just Google my name for
Awesome.
podcasts and you can usually find me. I put out a lot of content. I'm not a very good self-promoter, unfortunately.
No, there's some good content. I've enjoyed your website and watched a number of your videos, and they're very informative. They're very lively, just like our time is here today. And I want to thank you for our time here today. It's been great to be with you, and thanks for all you've given our listeners and myself.
Oh, thanks, Graham. This was a pleasure.
I also want to thank you, our listeners, today for joining me and Keith. I also want to remind you that today's episode and an archive of all of our other podcasts and resource materials can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. Thanks again for being with us on today's show, and we'll look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.